today I wanted to talk about the connection between sexual energy and the pineal gland. And this is like, it's super interesting, it's super fascinating, because it's almost like, you know, if you look at what is the pineal gland, or we could call, like, use words like the third eye. In Taoism we talk about the crystal palace as well, right? And, you know, we all kind of know these as the center of consciousness. And if you look at many spiritual traditions, they look at, you know, doing meditation, trying to activate your third eye and so on, like as if you're trying to kind of go in there and somehow activate it in your brain, maybe by transcending all the negative, trying to pretend you're not human, getting into this kind of, you know, almost like spaced out, I call it like a spiritual bypassing state, you know, essentially this is what I'm kind of talking about, isn't it? You know, well, if we look at Taoism, it all works out like really perfectly, really divinely, really profoundly. If you even take a person who's never heard anything about spirituality or meditation or anything, you know, and a person who's just living, you know, in the jungle, uneducated in the forest or whatever, right? There's this really fascinating process that goes on with the human body. So we all know there's one thing pretty much every human being is going to start feeling, and that is sexual arousal, right? What happens when we feel sexual arousal? So very often, certainly if you look at like ancestors sort of living in, you know, let's say away from civilized society in nature, right? That feeling, that arousal feeling would come up, and then we all know that energy, it can and it does naturally move up. And the Taoists describe this very clearly and precisely. And I definitely recommend, if you want to know more details about this, make sure you signed up to my 3-day challenge, which is going on next week. I'll do a whole day where I'm explaining about how this alchemy system works and how we can actually activate it within our bodies, right? However, let's have a little look, very basic right now. So the arousal activates, and in nature, it then activates the heart, i.e. the feeling of love, right? So it's kind of sending this energy up. Okay, if you want to know more details, make sure you've signed up to my 3-day challenge next week, okay? And then that energy eventually will come up, and it will come up into the third eye, and it will actually start activating the third eye, or the pineal gland. Now, there's a really amazing book, and I recommend this to a lot of my clients. I'll recommend it to you as well. It's called Craniosacral Qigong by Master Mantak Chia, right? And a client of mine, he had just bought it. We were having the coaching session a couple of days ago, and he was showing me the book, and I'm like, man, I remember when I first read that book, because it brought the whole Taoist stuff onto this like amazing next level for me that just blew my mind. Because of course, look, we all know about Taoism and multiple orgasms, and multiple orgasms are great, and this is what I was actually explaining to him. You know, it's really great like having multiple orgasms, right? But this is like a step on a journey, you know. It's something that draws us in. I think there's very few people who don't want it, right? Yeah, but once we get into that place where we're starting to experience and feel this sexual energy moving up, what it actually does is it goes into what we call the crystal palace in the center of the brain. We Taoists, we call it the crystal palace. It's basically where the pineal, the pituitary, and the hypothalamus gland are in the middle of the brain. And it then starts to basically activate these energy centers. So we know about them, you know, activating to produce DMT. And I just want to invite you, if you're watching this, you have any questions, stick those questions in the chat. I'm going to be going over and answering them quite shortly. However, what essentially happened, and I can just tell you from my own experience, how I started to experience this, and I didn't even know what was going on until I got hold of that book, Craniosacral Qigong, and I actually started to realize that as my energy center, so the lower energy center, which is really important in the belly, the middle one in the heart, and then the upper one in the dantian, what starts happening when it starts to activate, I was noticing I'd be meditating in a dark room, my eyes shut and everything, and I'd literally be feeling this lightness, like there was light inside of my brain. And the light, I was like, where is that coming from? What's going on? Why am I shutting my eyes, but there's still brightness, right, inside of my head? And it was only when I actually read that book, right, Craniosacral Qigong, that I started to learn about all these different hormones that are being produced within the brain, and that actually, and it shows in the book, like a skull of a meditator versus the skull of a non-meditator. And what starts happening through these meditative practices is that if you've ever seen a diagram of a skull or a skull, you can see there are these little creases in between the plates, and that as these start to activate, teeny little millimeter or fraction of a millimeter opens up in the plates, literally letting light, right, into the middle of the brain, causing this enlightenment and pineal activation, right? Now, I mentioned pineapple because pineapple, I do believe it's great for activating the pineal gland. It's great for the body on like so many different levels. I absolutely love it. I have pineapple most days, in fact, and you probably saw the picture of me eating the pineapple too, right? Okay, but now when we talk about this pineal activation and we talk about enlightenment, and people can be like, what is enlightenment? And honestly, it's a state we drift in and out of, you know. But when we're starting to have this light and this enlightenment, right, in the brain, okay, I mean, this is what kind of like moon gazing and sun gazing are all about, bringing the light in. Now, as a Taoist, I'm going to say like the most important energy center is the bottom energy center. You do not build a house without putting in a strong foundation. And if you're spiritual and you're trying to transcend and you're trying to be all up here and, you know, get rid of your negative emotions and your sexuality and so on and so forth, you have no strong foundation in your house. If you are not manifesting what you need in your life, you have no strong foundation in your house. We are here as spiritual beings in the physical dimension because we need to be able to basically manifest, and we need to learn and figure out how do you actually survive and live here in the physical plane. Everything here is perfect, and this is all what we're here to figure out as part of our as part of our spiritual development. But this is very much to do with the sexual energy and the emotional energies, which are really, really important parts of essentially like how we develop. So now, getting back to the pineal gland, and I just mentioned moon gazing and sun gazing, sunset gazing. That's actually my doggy banging on the tripod stand, and they're causing it to wriggle, right? Now, one thing I found was like a really amazing, fantastic, great way to be able to assist with this process of the energy rising up through the three dantians into the upper dantian, starting to activate the pineal gland, which is just phenomenal when this experience starts to happen, was actually going, I find like at sunset is amazing, like especially if you can get a sunset over the beach and over the sea, and you watch the sunset and you start to just flick really fast with your eyelids, just with the intention to bring and pull in the energy into your into literally your pineal gland and your center of your brain and your so-called crystal palace. And this works amazing with the moon, especially when you've got a full moon and you're like moon gazing and you're doing this and you're bringing in this light. Now, in many ways, like, I don't know how much detail I want to go into this right now. I'm just curious if anyone here has got any questions, right? Because I think that it's so easy to make the mistake of being like, I want to activate my pineal gland without doing the work with the lower energy centers, because the lower energy centers are essential. The lower self is really, really important, just as the upper self is really important. And it's like, it's this funny thing, like, you know, the upper self is up here, and the upper self is this big spiritual ego, intellectual spiritual ego, right, that kind of looks down on the lower self, and it's like, ew, you get sick, ew, you go shitting, ew, you want to have sex, ew, you feel angry, like all superior up here. But the fact is that this up here is nothing without the lower self, right? And the lower self is really what allows us to get the benefits from the experience in the in the physical dimension, and why we as spiritual beings come here to exist in the physical dimension. Now, I've been doing with quite a few of my clients recently, we have this practice where there's a practice called the microcosmic orbit, where we bring the energy up and down, which is like super, super important, because that actually integrates the upper and the lower self. When we bring the lower energy down and the lower energy up and the upper energy down, because when we bring the upper energy down, it's like we're bringing this feeling of perfection. We're bringing the perfection of up here down to the physical down here. That's far from perfect, but we're bringing the power, because there's a lot of power in the lower self. You know, if you're spiritual, you think you're spiritual, and you haven't got two 20-pound notes to rub together, you've got a problem, right? You know, when you bring that power up to the higher self, that's when that higher self really becomes something quite incredible. Now, this practice I've been doing with some clients, it involves we start bringing sexual energy up the body, and we bring it into the brain, and we go through this process, and what we're doing is we're refining Jing. In other words, we're taking sexual energy and we're transforming it to put it into our body and to use to actually make our body, like regenerate the body on a cellular level, essentially, right? But there's so many different levels to the practice, and obviously you're bringing it into the brain. You're feeding the brain, you're cleaning the brain in a way as well, and you're just getting everything, you know, within the headspace and the brain working really, really well. But then we always bring the energy down, and one of the things I always say to people again and again and again, because it's so important, is store it in your belly. We must store it in the belly. It's essential that this energy basically gets stored in our belly, because we don't actually want the center of gravity to be up here. We don't want to be centered in the brain. We don't want to be centered in the pineal gland, the third eye. We don't even want to be centered in the heart, even though having a really open, active heart is incredibly important for everything that we're doing. If we're not grounded and balanced and centered in the center of the body, which is the belly, we are in trouble. You know, you can even try this, that if you stand and you think and you bring your energy center into your brain and someone pushes you, you're going to just go flying. If you're centered in your lower belly, you are so solid. If you don't believe me, go and watch a video of Mike Tyson fighting. Oh, doggy, what's going on? That's my doggy, keeps on kicking this this tripod stand. So I'm super curious if anyone here has any questions about this, but I also realize you might have typed in questions and I might not be able to see them. So because this happens like this, that the questions don't kind of come up here. But what I want to just say is, make sure you signed up for my live next week, okay? Make sure you're coming to the Step Into Your Erotic Aliveness live, and I'm going to be going into way more detail on this topic, explaining exactly how the alchemy works and how the pineal gland is activated by sexual energy. And don't forget to eat your pineapples. Bye.